Welcome, everybody, to GZ Truth News. We have the almighty, fantastic, one and only guest, Jim Fetzer. Thank you very much for being on here. It is, what is it, July 20th, 2023. It's been a long time. We got a lot to catch up on. I hope everything is good. Tell us all, Jim. Let's hear it.
Well, the delay has been because I underwent heart bypass surgery a month ago tomorrow. 2 weeks after, my surgeon was ecstatic about the outcome. I'm feeling very, very good and just got back from evaluation for a cardiac rehab program at a local hospital, and I like what they're doing, and I'm very enthusiastic about how things stand.
Well, we are all very happy that everything went smoothly, and you're looking fantastic. So we want you back on the scene and telling us, downloading us on all the information on all the crazy stuff that's going on, because we still hope the good guys are winning. We're still hoping we're kicking ass and we're still moving forward. But man, every time, every day, we're reading crazy nonsense.
Well, the situation in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia is far better and more promising than the situation right here at home in the United States. Russia is kicking butt. Ukraine's getting wiped. Russia has a 10-to-1 advantage in artillery. The Ukrainians have run out of 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition. And let me say, as a former artillery officer in the Marine Corps, that most deaths in combat are not brought about by the infantry or by tanks, but by artillery. So that for the Ukrainians to run out of howitzer ammunition is staggering. Indeed, as long ago as 6 months, Mike Adams was predicting that Ukraine couldn't possibly win because it would take the U.S. a year to two to set up production capacities for the artillery rounds they would need to continue the fight. He had it exactly right. This latest effort, sending cluster bombs by the United States, was revealed when Biden let it slip that we're out of ordinary artillery ammunition, and therefore we're sending the cluster bombs as fill-in. They're in the form of 155 howitzer cluster bomb munitions. This is a very bad thing. It's a contravention of the basically anti-cluster bomb treaty signed by over 100 nations, sadly not including the United States, Russia, or Ukraine. But these munitions are very, very hazardous. They're especially harmful for children, civilians, because they have a high dud rate, meaning they don't explode always on impact. And children will pick them up, looking at them as curiosities, even toys, and they explode, blow the limbs off, or kill the kids outright. So that's outrageous. Russia has observed it too has cluster munitions it could use in response. But the fact is, what's going on in the trenches is a slaughter of Ukrainians. They're being reduced to forcibly recruiting old men and young kids who really are put on the lines with virtually no training. Russia, of course, is not going to surrender the territory it's taken at such great expense. The Crimea, the Donbass, or at least 4 other provinces they have secured. And yet, the United States and Ukraine really at the behest of Israel. Because while this is a proxy war, it's not one between the U.S. and Russia, excuse me, using Ukraine, but between Israel and Russia using the U.S., Ukraine, and the West as their proxies. The Israelis have found their situation in the Middle East increasingly untenable. Most of the residents of Israel are genetic descendants of the Khazars from the Khazarian region that is now modern-day Ukraine, and they want to turn Ukraine into the new Israel. The reason, therefore, the West has been so adamant, and you even have Biden declaring that we're there for as long as it takes, which on its face is simply absurd. there's no bona fide national security interest for the United States vis-a-vis Ukraine is because our Congress is Israeli-occupied territory. Our media, completely controlled by the Zionists. I have panels of 100 executives from CNN, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. 100 executives from NBC, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. New York Times, 100 executives, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. No wonder we can't get accurate reporting. Everything is done with an Israeli twist, a Zionist perspective. And of course, it was Cynthia McKinney, bless her heart, who revealed on Iranian television back in 2011 that all new members of Congress are asked to sign a pledge to put the interests of Israel ahead of even those of the United States, which they have been consistently doing. Tucker, by the way, nailed Mike Pence at the Family Values Summit in Des Moines, Iowa, where he's been interviewing various wannabes for the GOP nomination for 2024 by asking him how, when every city in America is faring more poorly than when Biden came into office, how can he justify sending all these resources to Ukraine and ignore those of American citizens? And Pence, and he might as well have slit his throat with a sharp knife, said that was not his concern. Outrageous. Pence, of course, betrayed the nation when, in his role as vice president on January 6th, he refused to send back to those states where there were conflicting slates of electors, the legislators of those states, the right to determine which was the proper slate. And of course, the whole event, which was engineered by Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, mayor of DC, the FBI, with all kinds of informants. I'm now suspecting there were hundreds of FBI operatives who were functioning as agitators that day. For Christopher Wray, under questioning before the Congress, refused to answer the question of how many were there. That's because the number would boggle the mind. He's not the only candidate who's been eviscerated by Tucker. He's doing a great job. And by the way, let me say, when Tucker was on Fox, he had about 3 million viewers. On Twitter, times 20, 60 million. So Tucker, by doing shorter segments, and they're irregular in their appearance, is nevertheless commanding a huge audience and making a difference. He also had interviews with Nikki Haley, Asa Hutchinson, others that did not go well for them. These are all candidates who are polling at less than 10%, where the only above that alternative to Trump, who's now enjoying a 30-point lead, is Ron DeSantis, whose own prospects have been diminished by any number of developments in which he's been engaged. Indeed, he's gone out of his way to speak up on behalf of Israel and demand even stronger anti-Semitism legislation, which, of course, is used against anyone who raises the least criticism of Israel. But the big picture in terms of Ukraine and the war is we have a conflict between an immovable object, Russia, and an irresistible force, Israel. And they're pulling out all the stops, all the NATO nations. What you're seeing is the Zionist political muscle being exercised. I'm pleased to report that it appears Russia will prevail absent a nuclear exchange, where sending F-16s was, in my opinion, a very unwise decision because, as the Russians have observed, Some F-16s are nuclear capable, others are not, but they cannot discern the difference. Thus, Putin has declared that if F-16s are introduced, it will be regarded as a nuclear event and require a response based upon Russia's nuclear doctrine, which actually requires not a piecemeal tit-for-tat response, but a massive wholesale onslaught against the West and the United States, which would lead to the deaths of between 100 and 200 million within an hour and a half, and where Russia's military superiority is so vast, there's no possible way the West could prevail, although, as has been observed many times, in a nuclear war there are no winners, where the living will envy the dead. It does appear from scenarios of wargaming that a nuclear winter will prevail in the northern hemisphere of Earth, but it will largely leave the southern unaffected. So not all of humanity will be extinguished thereby, but most of what is widely regarded as the most intellectually, scientifically, artistically creative segment of Earth will be taken out. Just to remind those who missed the memo, a single Satan II ICBM Russia could launch with 15 independently targetable warheads would be sufficient, the one missile, to take out all of France. Meanwhile, Russia, sensing skullduggery, including with the new attack on the Kerch Bridge that connects Russia to the Crimea, has pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal that allowed Ukraine to ship grain through the Black Sea unaffected. They're shutting down the Black Sea and they're conducting a blockade of Odessa, a major port, where I believe it's become increasingly obvious that Russia has to control all of the access to the Black Sea vis-a-vis Ukraine, and they will succeed in doing so. No less in eminence than Jacob Rothschild has declared Putin to be an enemy of the New World Order, adding that the New World Order cannot move forward without Ukraine. Well, it doesn't look as though possessing Ukraine is in the cards. I do believe Russia is going to prevail, an ugly victory, but they will not relinquish. It may be Russia retains control of 40% geographically of Ukraine, and the rest, which is highly dysfunctional, will remain under the control of Kiev, but will represent no serious threat. NATO, of course, was confronted with a demand by the Ukrainian president that it become a member of NATO, which, of course, would be completely absurd. Indeed, it was a prospective membership of Ukraine in NATO that was the primary reason behind the special military operation undertaken by Russia, announced on February 24th of last year, where they have so ably been moving forward with great respect for civilians and infrastructure. I think the one reason the war has taken as long is a combination of, first, the signing of the Minsk agreement, which was done in bad faith by the West to provide a peaceful resolution. Had it been adhered to, there would have been no need for a special military intervention, and the fact that Russia cannot afford to allow any such thing to take place. And Article 5 would be invoked immediately. Since Ukraine is already at war, the other NATO nations would be obligated to come to its defense, which means merely by accepting Ukraine into NATO would trigger World War III. I do not see that happening. On the other hand, NATO, at its recent summit in Lithuania, exhibited grandiose plans for extending the reach of NATO to far-flung lands in Africa, south in Asia, even in the South Pacific, which frankly I find totally revealing that NATO is not and never was a defensive treaty organization, but rather the offensive or military arm of the deep state, even largely controlled by the military-industrial complex. What I find more disturbing, given that Russia appears to have firm control of Ukraine, is that using the Bank of International Settlements, there's a proposal that emanates from the World Economic Forum for the Great Reset to take place, global control of all assets, information, and people, by creating a worldwide network of records and documents of all property throughout the entire world. Money, houses, cars, all be tokened into as digital assets within an everything in one place global unified ledger. CBDC's digital currency would be the core of the functioning of this tokenized world and serve as a reserve currency on the unified ledger. Transactions between CBDCs and tokenized assets, which represent real world property, but operate seamlessly through smart contracts on one programmable platform. Each token representing a real world asset in this digital space would contain a large amount of data received from the real world in real time about what it is, who it belongs to, and more, as well as rules on how that particular asset can and cannot be used. The BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, explains how the rules are set up by directly embedding supervisory features into the token itself, which can be tailored to specific rules. The main takeaway of this BIS blueprint is that whatever happens in their dystopian digital world has legally binding impact on assets in the real world. So maybe the WF's catchphrase should be, instead of "you'll own nothing and you'll be happy," you may own digital tokens, but we will control the real assets. In other words, we're talking about a recipe for global slavery that has only now been revealed in its full dimensions. This is staggering and represents the greatest threat to humanity in all of the history of civilization. And have no doubt, out of frustration over their inability to take Ukraine, they have Plan B, using the Bank of International Settlements to effect control over all property, all assets throughout the entire world. Turning to developments in Washington, D.C. So much evidence of the corruption of the Biden crime family has come forward, including Marjorie Taylor Greene exposing Hunter Biden for trafficking women, showing graphic images of Hunter's sexual activity during hearings before the Congress. It is so overwhelming. It is so detailed. It is so specific. It is so damning that the Zionist-controlled media won't even report it. Instead, Merrick Garland appointing Jack Smith as essentially a torpedo in gangster language, a hitman to go after Donald Trump, has generated one outrageous indictment after another. They are flooding the media. The mainstream is reporting it all. in order to distract attention from the amount of proof that Biden and his family are corrupt and have been corrupt and are remaining corrupt and above the law, that the DOJ and the FBI have been so massively weaponized with one indictment after another, some based on very remote, far-fetched, never before invoked statutes and laws, where if they were to have their way, and this is really, truly the ultimate objective, if they were to have their way, Trump would be precluded from running for president by virtue of violating a statute saying anyone engaged in insurrection, which was intended to apply to Confederate officers and soldiers post the Civil War, may not be eligible to hold federal office against Trump. Frankly, I do not believe it's going to play out. All of these efforts are ill-founded legally. They do not have a substantial basis in either the law or facts. And therefore, I believe they're ultimately going to fail. But because court procedures tend to work at a snail's pace, they're going to have all of these issues before the public to tarnish him in relation to his candidacy for the 2024 nomination. Now, ironically, every time an indictment has been brought against Trump, it has actually elevated his standing in the polls. And I expect these developments to be no different. Even in relation to Biden, we have whistleblowers coming from the IRS, even including a gay Democrat who's accused prosecutors of not acting ethically or appropriately in the Hunter Biden probe. And that is indeed an understatement. Let me mention, by the way, Twitter's not been neglecting all of these developments. Here's Tom Fitton, the head of Judicial Watch, tweeting, for example, in relation to a recent report about Marjorie Taylor Greene exposing contents of the Biden laptop of him abuse of women and girls and committing no end of violations of laws, breaking. Biden, who is the most corrupt president since he was vice president, trying to criminalize criticism of how he was elected with unprecedented indictment of Trump. Accordingly, to leak to the allied New York Times, his operative, Jack Smith, threatens Trump with unprecedented, they're dredging up laws and offenses never before applied. The whole business about the Mar-a-Lago raid and the classified documents was a farce, because the president has ultimate authority. And when Jack Smith brought his indictment, he did not even cite the basic determinative statute, which has to do with the handling of presidential records in relation to the National Archive, because it gave Trump a clear pass on having committed any offenses, but reverted to a much earlier law that had thereby been supervened. So we're seeing all kinds of outrageous activity. On a different scale, let me mention, I've done 2 programs recently that I believe would be potentially of great interest to your audience, my friend. One is with Scott Bennett on his show, Global Great Awakenings, which you can access on my Twitter account at Jim Fetzer, or Mike King, who is the editor of the Anti-New York Times and of the realhistorychan.com, published an extensive piece I had authored with Brian Davidson, private investigator, of how we know that Sandy Hook was a FEMA drill, not only featuring access to the FEMA document for the Sandy Hook exercise, but also records showing on the Connecticut FEMA website that the drill exercise L366 was scheduled, where they even set up a map to show how you could get from the headquarters for FEMA in Connecticut and Bridgeport down to the school on Dickinson Drive, and where I point out, among other things, that this was not even an elementary school, it was a special needs school, which is why you didn't have a U-shaped driveway for buses to come in, drop off kids, and go out without having to run into each other and create traffic jams. It was a small operation. Parents would drive in, drop off their kids, come back later. One of the major tells for which is when you examine aerial photographs, if you pay attention to what's missing, you notice there's no playground. There's no playground or equipment. This was a kindergarten through fourth grade school. Also, of course, I reviewed the bidding that it had none of the handicapped access required by the Americans with Disabilities Act under federal and state law at the time, meaning it could not have even been an operating school, and were Sandy Hook insiders, one of whom was gassed as a dead child, another of whom was cast as a dead teacher, have informed me through their very dear friend and of mine that, in fact, Eric Holder had come to Newtown in 2006 and offered the community $140 million if they would participate in this event. When you bring in the whole community, it's known as a capstone event. They actually had auditions for roles. They had all kinds of benefits. They signed non-disclosure agreements. They pay no taxes. They get free college tuition. In the community, those families who weren't enthusiastic about the idea simply moved out of Newtown in advance. But it proceeded on that basis. And as one commentator on my situation in Sandy Hook has observed, in his opinion, the greatest tell is how the legal system has handled Sandy Hook cases, none of which, including my own, have been decided on the merits. Each of which, including Remington and Alex Jones, were decided on the procedural grounds, either assumed or stipulated. In the case of Alex Jones, he's alleged to have defaulted and found guilty by failing to participate in discovery, but no one can discern what it was he failed to provide through discovery. It's all ridiculous. And in my case, which I took all the way to the United States Supreme Court in this article, you have access to various of the key documents from my legal case, where it turns out a judge in Wisconsin is allowed to set aside evidence that he does not regard as reasonable. So even though I had the FEMA manual, the FBI Consolidated Crime Report, all kinds of photographs and records, he set it all aside as unreasonable or, to my astonishment, not relevant to the truth or accuracy of the death certificate for the publication of which I was being sued for defamation, even though the copy, the version attached to the complaint, was completely different than the version I had published, which had no file number, no town, no state certification, but the one attached to the complaint had all. In essence, I was found guilty of defamation over a death certificate I'd never seen, never published, or commented upon, which is a reflection of the state of the law in Wisconsin, and where I even adduced the testimony of two, not one, but two forensic document experts, who now confirmed that those two documents were fake, but two others I'd introduced as evidence were also fake. Ordinarily, in disputes over documents, forensic expert testimony is decisive. The Posner team suing me did not produce a countervailing expert. It ought to have been settled on that ground alone. The judge simply set them aside as unhelpful, outrageous. Read it and weep. And in addition now, just yesterday, I did a special on my Raw Deal radio program with Joe Olson, who's an engineer qualified in 4 different branches of engineering, a brilliant guy, devoted to this issue that seems to have been resurrected. My best guess is it may have been a CIA mind control plot. The idea that Earth is flat, stationary, immobile, center of the universe, that the sun, the moon, the stars, including the constellations, all revolve around Earth. Now, if you go back thousands of years to that time, or even before the pre-Socratic philosophers, you find that view was held. And even Aristotle, whom I esteem as one of the 3 greatest philosophers of all time, along with Immanuel Kant and Charles S. Peirce, believed Earth was the immobile center. But in order to maintain that view today, you'd have to reject the history of science, the laws of astronomy and physics, where while it is logically possible to maintain the view, to do so consistently, you have to make drastic revisions in other beliefs, which is really quite stunning, all things considered intellectually. So he made a 2-hour presentation, and those who are intrigued by this issue, I encourage you to go to my BitChute channel, Jim Fetzer, for the Raw Deal, the Flat Earth special with Joe Olson of yesterday. I'd simply add that I am back in the saddle. I've done somewhere between a dozen and 20 shows already, and I'm very, very pleased to be back with you again, my friend. I like what you do, and I enjoy participating, and I'm pleased as punch to be here today.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Jim. I mean, as always, you definitely unpacked a lot. I don't know if you want to talk more about your court case. What's the updates on all that? What's going on?
Well, sure, I'd be glad to. I am back in the Court of Appeals in Wisconsin. The whole objective, of course, was to suppress access to the book itself, which was too good. In fact, my inside sources have told me they've distributed hundreds of copies of the book, and everyone they've shared it with, including the participants in the event, like the book because it's accurate, because it's true. This, of course, is why Amazon banned it less than a month after it had gone on sale. Even though it had sold nearly 500 copies, it was destined to become a runaway bestseller, because of which I released it for free as a PDF. So they went to court to try to take the book and my blog just as Alex Jones' trial was beginning. And I think they had a special interest in taking the blog because they were about to attack me in the court for a message from his British correspondent, Paul Watson, to Alex Jones, was read by one of the producers saying, we've got to stay as far away as possible from that batshit crazy Fetzer, which of course is ludicrous. If Alex Jones had been sued over claiming Sandy Hook was a hoax, then he needs just the kind of evidence I produced in the book. It could have been a godsend for him in this legal context. But even during a video deposition he gave in Connecticut, he declared he'd never read it, which frankly impugns his integrity. How could he be taking a public stand on such a controversial issue without having read the only objective, scientific, well-founded, systematic study of what did and did not happen. They took the book as a partial payment for my indebtedness acquired from a trial for damages, $450,000, and granted me $100,000 in credit for the book and the blog. But that's just outrageous. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
You have it there, indeed. Wonderful. For the book and the blog, but they did it improperly. It was just given directly. What has to be done, even according to Wisconsin law, it has to be given to a receiver, and the receiver puts out bids to determine the actual value, and then monitors to ensure that once the amount of indebtedness is paid off, the asset returns to its original owner, me. But they didn't do that. And indeed, Posner had made clear he wasn't going to publish the book, he was going to kill it. Well, that's contrary to the whole spirit of compensation for damages. So here was a judge presiding over a case that was violative of Wisconsin law. In fact, because Posner, he wanted to take control of the book, was basically contradicting the position that the book was a work of defamation. He was under what's known legally as estoppel, meaning he was stopped from doing precisely what he did in taking control of the book. So I have that in the court now. In addition, they sought to do a garnishment from bank accounts of mine, including with my wife, where they, it turns out, during the hearing, didn't understand that I had two secure exempt accounts, one from money from a retirement account and another for Social Security, and that my wife had deposited some reimbursement for expenditures taken out of the former account, the retirement account. That was not new money, but really reimbursement for money that was already exempt. They even charged the full tax return when, of course, half of that belongs to her for both federal or state. They even acted as though a gift she'd been given by her daughter was new money. In other words, they did a very slovenly job here. I think it was merely as a form of harassment. And then, after we had a hearing, and the judge says, well, what we can do is have a follow-up hearing after you decide what to do, which may be to stop back and, step back and begin the whole thing over again. He submitted a motion for the distribution of funds, different than his original proposal, but equally shabby and ill-conceived. And the judge acted in a preemptory fashion to grant the motion without my having the opportunity to respond. So I'm, in fact, filing this week, tomorrow, my brief to appeal that decision as well, which I expect to be combined with a suit to regain control of my book and my original blog. And they had to block the blog because as soon as you mention this batshit crazy Fetzer, a lot of people would have wanted to know what did this batshit crazy Fetzer have to say about Sandy Hook. And the blog was just bristling with proof, evidence, videos, documents, photographs that it was a hoax. So they couldn't afford to allow that to happen. So they had to take down the blog too. So if you went now to the original jamesfetzer.org,
right,
it switches you to documents related to the taking of the book and the blog rather than information that would illuminate the public about what did and did not happen at Sandy Hook.
Right. And, even if they want to, even if it was real, all the weird things that, there's a million things that you mentioned and, with Mike Palachek or whatever, it's like there's there's so many questions, there's so many loopholes, there's so many plot holes and so many weird things going on. I mean, even if it was real, what the hell's going on with all these weird things going on? But anyway, well,
obviously, this is where I wanted to add one commentator, Ron Avery, who even has a whole blog, a whole website with the key documents from my case, has observed that, in his opinion, the strongest evidence that it was a hoax is the way the courts have handled, none of which have done it properly. It's been such a grotesque abuse of the law here that the only reasonable expectation is because they had so much to hide that they had to abuse the legal process to achieve their objectives, which could not have been achieved by adhering to the law.
There you go. Yep, pretty much. So, well, obviously, we're all doing our best, especially you, to tackle on head on these issues. And, we appreciate everything you do, Jim. I mean, what's the conclusion? Where are we all heading with all of this, including, with the inflation and the corruption and all the crazy stuff and this and that? And,
Well, the Biden admin is doing everything it can to destroy America. I mean, the flood of immigrants is creating major problems. Where do you house them? The mayor of New York City has been putting them up in hotels at fantastic expense to the taxpayers. And now he's suggesting private homeowners should take in a migrant into their home, and the city will pay them $175 for doing that. But who wants to bring a stranger of a different culture into their home? My God. What could wind up happening? What mayhem? How many disgusting, unexpected, and unwanted hazards would you encounter by doing that? So I've been terribly worried because among these appear to be some 400,000 Chinese of military age who appear to be trained. They don't have weapons, but we know from the past that agencies like the EPA and IRS have spent $4 billion accumulating military weapons for which they have no apparent use, which I believed are stockpiled around the country for access by those who are entering to create an army internal to the United States to create havoc. I also fear that once any form of civil war breaks out, that the government will impose martial law. And under martial law, all those categories, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, Trump supporters, MAGA members, and the like, are going to be classified as domestic terrorists, rounded up and summarily executed. And if you think that sounds far-fetched, just take a look at the brilliant 1991 film called The Chekist about what happened in Russia following the Bolshevik Revolution, when tens of millions of ordinary law-abiding Russians were summarily executed. I believe they plan to carry out a similar purge of Americans who believe in the Constitution and Donald Trump. There has never been such hysteria over a candidate in American history than the Democrats have shown by Trump, because he is, and I believe their opinion coincides with mine, the one person who could command enough loyalty, allegiance, dedication to set things right. So what's first and foremost in my mind is putting Trump back into a position of authority where he can begin to restore some of the most basic elements of law and order that are fundamental to a civilized society, to which we had grown accustomed until the theft of the election in 2020 and the installation of the Biden regime, which has done more damage to the United States in its 2.5 years in office than could have ever been inflicted by all of our enemies abroad. I mean, it's a stunning situation. The latest numbers I hear is that Biden's poll numbers are down to 9%. 9%. I believe, therefore, even attempting to rig the election, that's not going to work. I think they first and foremost would like to have Gavin Newsom as their candidate for president and Michelle Obama for vice president. Roger Stone has recently suggested they want Michelle to be the candidate for president. But I've done a huge amount of research on Michelle. If you want to see a sample, go to my blog at jameshfetzer.org and under events. Go to the False Flags and Conspiracies Conference for 2020 and watch Deception Galore, where you're going to be staggered to discover that not only did Hillary use body doubles in the past repeatedly, even on national television during the biggest debates, not only that Joe Biden, the guy in office, is not the original Joe who is the senator from Delaware who appears to have died in 2017, but that Michelle Obama was born Michael LaVaughn Robinson, is a man with breast implants and a huge shaving bill. So if she becomes the nominee, the American people, I believe, are in for a big surprise. All this.
That's for sure. We'll see how it all goes. It's amazing. If it wasn't all so real, it would be all very entertaining, and it still is. But the fact that it's that it's all in our face and it's pretending to be real is it's really amazing.
You're exactly right. This is one of those cases where truth truly is stranger and less, far more threatening than fiction.
Big time. Well, Jim, I appreciate. I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the downloads and glad you're back in great health. And let's keep kicking ass and hopefully we can move forward from all this.
My great pleasure. I'm just delighted to be back with you again.
Likewise. Thank you. God bless. God bless this country. God bless the people, the citizens, you and everybody. And let's keep in touch and make something happen.
Absolutely.
Support it. Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure.
Take care. Bye.